All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Before we get started, I thought I'd give you just a quick overview on what's going to be happening on the call today. So this workshop deals a lot with conservation in Canada and the ways that youth, just like all of you, can get involved. I think we're all going to have lots of fun, so let's get started. My name is Isabel. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm one of your hosts today. On the call as well, we have Maya Carr, who's going to help us run the slideshow. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hello, everybody. My name is Maya Carr. I'm the current director of the Canadian Rockies Youth Network and probably the one that's been emailing with you guys. I work as the director, and which means I help lead, facilitate, and organize meetings for the rest of the 9 other current committee members that we have. Together, we plan these workshops and other events. Just this weekend, we were in Canmore, together planning our in-person summit that's going to be happening March 9th to 12th. The Canada, where we hope to have around 50 youth from across Alberta and BC attend. So if you'd like to learn more about all that good stuff, you can you can ask questions at the question period, and I'll answer them later on. We also have Leah and Sierra on the call today. So Leah, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Leah and I use she, they pronouns, and currently I'm in grade 10 at Henry Wisewood. I'm a new recruit to CRIN, and I've been a part of it for a few months now. I joined because Maya, our director, runs the environmental club at Wisewood, and she told us about it. CRIN seemed really interesting, and I found out that it is. I'm part of a creative team where I create posters, and soon we'll be creating some literary pieces. I am also a secretary where I digitize notes from planning sessions. And next, I would like to introduce to you Sierra.
My name is Sierra and I use she, they pronouns. I'm a grade 10 student at Henry Wisewood as well, and I've been in the network for around 4 months. I first got involved when I also went to a meeting for the environmental club at my school. Currently, I'm a member of the creative team where I write blog posts, make infographics, and overall just make creative projects for the Canadian Rockies Youth Network.
As we move forward with taking action on truth and reconciliation, I would like to honor and acknowledge that I'm calling in from Mohkinstsis on traditional Treaty 7 territory. Treaty 7 is the home of the Blackfoot Confederacy, Siksika, Kainai, Piikani, as well as the Nakota and Tsuut'ina nations. This territory is also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3, within the historical Northwest Métis homeland. I have been living on Treaty 7 land for about 5 years now. I appreciate this land for letting me have various adventures and new experiences. I've grown as a person because of this land and the experiences I get because of it. Treaty 7 is one of the reasons why I'm part of this network. It has shown me the ways nature can provide comfort, and I'd like to give back, nurture the land, and keep it healthy for generations to come.
Before we hand this off, we're going to test your knowledge on what conservation looks like in the Rockies. So pull out your phones because we are playing Kahoots. Please enter the Kahoot code on the screen and we will give everyone about 2 minutes to log in.
Alrighty, let's start. First question, what is a national park?
Nice.
Good job. Yeah, the difference between blue and yellow there is set aside by national government and then provincial government. So national parks, national government, provincial parks, provincial government. But good job overall. Okay, Owen Batter in first place.
Nice.
Way to go. What percentage of Canada is covered by national parks?
Nice.
Whoa, that one person got it right. Way to go. Yeah, only 3% of Canada is covered by national parks.
which is why it's so critical that we learn how to preserve them.
Mhm. Approximately how much money do you think the Canadian government spent on conserving nature in 2021? It's kind of a guess because I don't know if you know this.
Oh, no, only 2 billion over 5 years. It's pretty low.
Nice job, Wolf, with your answer streak there.
Mhm.
All right, what makes a forest an old growth forest? Pretty close. Yeah, so if it's a wet coast, the wet coastal regions, if the trees are more than 250 years old, they're also considered old growth. And then if they're in the dry interior, if they're more than 140, then they're considered old growth. So pretty old. How many bison used to freely roam North America up until the mid 1800s? Woo, pretty close there. 4 people got that one right. Yeah, so currently bison are not listed as a threatened or endangered species. There are approximately 30,000 bison that live in the public and private herds of North America, and they're managed for these conservation goals that we have. And then approximately 400,000 bison are raised as livestock, but freely roaming bison right now are very rare, which is crazy to think about because there was so many of them freely roaming before. Roughly how many threatened or endangered species are there in Alberta? Yeah, so 40 was the correct answer. You guys are pretty close to 35 there, but yeah, 40. What percentage of Canada's land base is covered in trees? That's our boreal forests. What percentage?
Wow. Only 40%, 40% of Canadians' landmass is covered in boreal forest.
Mhm. Nice job, Wolf, taking over. Okay, last question. What percentage of Canada's land base is covered in wetlands? Yeah.
Well done. Well done.
Really good. I bring up wetlands because even though they make up a smaller fraction of Canada's land base compared to the 40% of our forests, the wetlands absorb CO2, carbon dioxide from the atmosphere at a rate 10 times faster than our mature rainforests or our boreal forests. Braeden knows a lot about. Yeah, so that's the end of our Kahoot. Thanks for everybody for playing. We're gonna get back into our presentation. So after our Kahoot, Braeden is going to talk to us about wildlife conservation and species at risk. Thank you, Braeden. Go ahead, you can take it away.
Yeah, my name is Braeden. I'm from Inside Education, and our main goal at Inside Education is really to support teachers, inspire students in natural resource and environmental education. We focus on stewardship and connections with our land, and that's kind of our backbone of what we do. And so why do we do this? Well, we believe that the more connected we feel with our local environment, the more likely we are to take care of it and consider the natural world in our decisions. Our aim to encourage lifetime stewardship and respect for the environment in today's students and society is really just supporting the education of a future generation and informed stewards. So one of the main messages that I want to take away from today and I want to highlight today is the importance of wildlife conservation and species at risk in the Rocky Mountain region. What is being done, how youth can be part of the solution, and what is already being impacted. Next slide. So let's take a look at species at risk. So species at risk designations is a whole wide topic, but it's really identified by the government of Alberta. It employs a number of strategies to monitor and protect the province's at-risk wild species. Through these strategies, information about population size, distribution trends, and threats are analyzed about vertebrate species. Once an organism is identified as at risk, the species becomes the focus of a detailed assessment by specialized committee, which often includes an Indigenous representative, environmental biologists, and so on. The committees are quite large. Alberta's native trout include lake trout, bull trout, Athabasca rainbow trout, and West Slope cutthroat trout, all of which, except for the lake trout, are currently considered a threatened species under Alberta's species at risk designation. So talking about species at risk, how does that come into the context of wildlife management and conservation? Well, when we take a look at aquatic ecosystems, they depend on the presence of native fish populations as part of natural food chains. So by consuming insects, other fish, trout act as kind of a top-down regulator in stream ecosystems. Trout were some of the first fish species to populate the region at the end of glaciation. And because they have adapted to such particular habitat requirements, they act as an indicator species for the health of watersheds. So at Inside Education, we offer, just go back one second. So at Inside Education, we offer lots of resources on the topic of species at risk, including Alberta's native trout. So this specific resource that we offer to students, schools, teachers, is really a resource that examines aquatic ecosystems, how humans are interacting with sensitive trout habitats, and as well as the initiatives that are underway to protect the trout. So native trout have seen a large decline in many, many years, and especially in the headwaters of the eastern slopes of the Rocky Mountains. So if you take a look at the map on the left side of your screen, there's a West Slope cutthroat trout sustainability index. And so you see that kind of on the east side, they're functionally extirpated. On kind of along the mountain regions, it's very low. And then there's some regions that are quite low. So really, an obviously threatened population of trout. So the three major threats that Alberta native trout are threatened with. So first, habitat degradation and loss. This is really due to the natural resource development in Alberta, which has led to the increase of roads, bridges. When we take a look at remote streams and rivers, they maybe weren't accessible before, but now that we have these roads, bridges, they're being impacted by stream bank erosion, increased sediment going into streams. So that's the first thing. Second thing, climate change. Climate change is really increasing the temperatures of water bodies, including streams, rivers, lakes, which really provide an inadequate habitat for trout to survive. Trout thrive in cold, clear water, ranging from temperatures from 9 to 17 degrees Celsius. And lastly, the major threat that we take a look at in Alberta, especially with native trout, is hybridization and competition. So hybridization is a huge threat, especially to native trout. So the introduction of native trout species and native fish species has really threatened native populations of trout. Non-native fish species, just like invasive species, can threaten populations by competing for food, habitats, occupying different regions, and potentially they can interbreed within native populations. When we take a look at interbreeding, that really puts a huge damper on the genetic and physical appearance of these specific fish. So what's being done? So when we take a look at the government, industry, academia, non-government organizations. They're all working together to make sure that we create a native trout recovery program across Alberta to aim to increase trout populations, and restore habitat. So one thing that's being done is habitat restoration. So habitat restoration is really including kind of the reclaiming of trails, improving stream crossings, restoring riparian areas to reduce erosion and sediment inputs into the streams. Secondly, trout that interbreed and or compete with native trout are being removed. And when they get removed, they get replaced by native trout species. Thirdly, restricting anglers access to certain water bodies only for allowing fishing to occur during certain times of the year. Even catch and release fishing can put a native trout species at risk. Next, we have land use planning. This is really important when land use planning, that really is important when it comes to considering habitat. And how does it impact it? Well, limiting access to recreators in certain areas and establishing protected areas, that really allows the survival to happen. And lastly, education. So as you see on the screen there's some signs, there's awareness campaigns. All of these have a significant impact on trout survival. So education campaigns such as Keep Your Wheels Out of Water are really organized by the government, conservation, and industry groups to raise awareness on the impact of driving OHVs, off-road, off-highway vehicles across the streams. So these are just a few ways that Rocky Mountain regions, government, industry has provided kind of a path forward into the trout recovery. So lastly, what I want to talk about is what youth can do. There's so many things that youth can do in this area. So especially in conservation and with species at risk, a few things that you can do as youth. First of all, learn about the different fish and habitats and how they impact the ecosystems. If you take a look at pathways, going hiking, wherever, right, there's likely going to be some signs that say stay on designated pathways. Obviously, that's very important, right? Making sure that that is key when you are off-road, keeping off-highway vehicles out of the waterways. Next thing you can do is clean the boats, fishing gear every time that you move into a new body of water. This will prevent invasive species and organisms from improperly entering the water bodies. Never put garbage and other materials in water bodies, and do not remove any vegetation, rocks, trees from banks and shores. Follow all fishing regulations if you're going fishing. Help inventory and evaluate risk of stream crossings to fish and their habitats by downloading a specific citizen science app. And so this is a really cool app. It allows the inventory of resources. So it's called the Alberta Watercourse Crossing Inventory app. So Maya maybe can share that link once I'm done. And one of the last things that I want you to think about is I want you to think about taking action, getting involved. Seek out and volunteer in school groups, community groups, clubs, organizations in your community that are focused on conservation projects to help fish and fish habitats. If you cannot find any, start one of your own. And lastly, consider a career in environmental research, environmental conservation, biology, like Leslie Peterson on the screen. So Leslie, she is an Alberta provincial biologist at Trout Unlimited, and she works with people to fix habitats that have been damaged, help people learn about fish and fish habitat, make creeks healthier, and help fish populations recover. So the things that I just mentioned and everything that I covered today, this is just a few things of how conservation is impacted, what we can do, and it's just a small list, right? Of course, youth are truly the future. The opportunities for change are endless. I really thank you for having me on today. The opportunities for change are endless. I really thank you for having me on today.
Wow, thank you, Braeden. You had a lot of knowledge to share with us today. Now, if anyone has any questions for myself, Maya, or Braeden, now is the time to ask them. Drop your questions in the chat or unmute yourself. Students and teachers, feel free to ask us anything about CRIN and conservation.
Okay, we got one question from Sean Green from Calgary. Do you feel the movement is doing enough to conserve biodiversity in Alberta? Maybe Braeden, do you want to take that one on?
Sure. Yeah. So in regards to kind of the government and how the government has conserved biodiversity, like I mentioned, there's so many initiatives out there that are potentially protecting that biodiversity topic, right? And so, in regards to trout, there's lots being done in regards to caribou, in regards to other native species that might be at risk. Biodiversity is a huge topic, and I think, without biodiversity, there really isn't an environment to live in, right? And so there's a lot of importance of biodiversity, and I think government is doing a lot, but I think potentially could be doing more. So that definitely is a very large topic.
Definitely, yeah. Thank you. Maybe we'll have time for one more question if anybody else would like to ask one, and then we'll move on. And another great question from Mr. Green. This topic makes us wonder who's responsible for the issue of species at risk, and how about big businesses, do they take action on biodiversity? For me, I guess it will depend on business. I feel many businesses, like, biodiversity is not at their top concern. Even with government, it's not the top most pressing issue. Braeden, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I would agree. Definitely big businesses, they're probably not on their high priority list to have biodiversity as their top initiative. But, I think when it comes to who's responsible for this issue, I think youth. I think youth are the new generation. And I think that is who is going to take charge. And I think, taking action, getting involved is really how we can move forward. And so I think with youth, youth can be very inspiring to large businesses, and that could potentially create a new initiative to create something new.
Definitely, I agree 100%. And that will segue.
Today, we are lucky enough to have Heidi Widmer from the Biosphere Institute of the Bow Valley on the call with us today. Heidi, please introduce yourself.
Hello, thanks, Sierra. Hi, Leah. Hi, Maya, and all the other folks whom I can't see. My name is Heidi Widmer. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm calling in from Cha Upchichian Kudebi, which is the Stoney name for Canmore, just west of you folks in Calgary. First of all, thank you for having me. It's snowy and cold outside, so I was like, an indoor webinar seems kind of fitting. I like to think about what the bison might be doing in the backcountry right now, probably standing fairly still. As I mentioned before, Biosphere Institute of the Bow Valley is located in Canmore. So we're just upstream from you along the Bow River. And I'm here to talk about the bison, which is not a spelling mistake. Bison is we have the genus, the species, and then the subspecies name of the plains bison, all being the same word. Sounds like a mouthful, but I'm not making this up. And oftentimes we interchange bison with buffalo. What's the difference? They're the same thing. Bison is the scientific name. Buffalo has kind of had many iterations throughout time, but bœuf is what the French fur traders initially referred to the bison as when they saw, as we learned in the Kahoot game, 30 to 60 million of these mammals, massive mammals, 1,600 pounds, roaming the landscape. So bœuf kind of evolved into buffalo, but they are used interchangeably. However, I would be remiss with all of those roaming bison to not mention the traditional names of the bison. So bison or buffalo in English we can use interchangeably. Typically when we're in a scientific field, we use the word bison, but the colloquial term is buffalo. And then Nakota language, the Stony Nakota, which is closest to me, and the Eyatka language is Tatanga. But as you can see from Blackfoot, Lakota, Dakota, Michif to Tlingit, there is a range of languages that describe this bison, and it just goes to show the expanse of the bison's habitat and what it once was. I just want to point out that Tlingit, for example, they're coastal peoples, and although they didn't directly hunt the bison in the plains, that their culture was still impacted immensely by trade and interaction with plains people or people of the buffalo. So I bring that up just to make sure that we're tying in the human cultural aspect to this ecological restoration. I'm referring specifically to the plains bison, which where that fancy blue arrow is pointing to the Rocky Mountains. And typically the plains bison is what, when we're talking about bison reintroduction, that's the subspecies that we're referring to. There are also the woods bison, which exist. And these are kind of the darker brown is where the historic ranges are. So mostly everywhere. It's not unbeknownst, I think, to this crowd that for thousands of years since the end of the last ice age, that there was anywhere from 30 to 60 million bison that roamed the Great Plains. So you could, if you look back to historic writing, they describe it as kind of this tapestry of movement along the plains, that it was literally scattered with bison. And not only is this a keystone species, one that has significant ecological importance, it's also of significant cultural importance. So when the Europeans first arrived and started saying, oh, there's the bœuf there, obviously it was a robust and very healthy population. This is a photo that just shocks me every time I look at it, of bison skulls, and you can see the man in the foreground standing. This is a slide or a photo from the Glenbow Museum. And bison, for their utility and for the variety of uses, was overhunted and led to the near extinction. So locally here, when it's eliminated from an area, we call it extirpated, so close to extirpated from this area, save for a few bison herds that were kept in captivity. The bones were used for fertilizer, gunpowder, fine bone china. Those are kind of the European settler uses, but we know from speaking with Blackfoot, speaking with the Stony Nakota, speaking with many Indigenous peoples across Canada, that everything from the hooves used for scraping hides, from the hides being used for teepees and moccasins, to the hair itself being used in ceremonial practices, everything in the animal was used depending on the time of year and depending what was needed at that time. So if we go back, this is the last photo, it's taking, let's say, early 1800s, the exact time date. That's not a digital camera. I don't know when that exact photo date was, but I'm going to guess early 1800s. And by the time, in the span of the early 1800s to the 1900s, the bison went from a population of 30 to 60 million to almost extirpated. So hence, this is why is of extreme relevance right now, as we're talking about not only of reconciliation of from a social justice point, but also from ecological justice. So from renewing the ecosystems that we now know, with increasing prevalence of ecological crisis, is really important to restore our natural spaces as well. The Buffalo Treaty, 2014, was signed as a commitment that we need to restore the bison if we are to restore these landscapes and if we are to restore our cultural relationships. I have a short clip here from Virgil Stevens. He lives in Manithni, just east of us here. And I think it's important for us to always think of the many voices and the many perspectives on what the bison means to these people. And I hope
Namaste. Good day in Stone. Today we're here to talk about buffalo. Buffalo was our main source for thousands of years. The indigenous people. Buffalo was our shelter. Buffalo was our food, our clothing. It's been a while since that we haven't used buffalo parts because we are in reserves and some of the buffaloes are gone, but still today we respect our buffalo because we use it in our religious ceremony and practicing. And we respect it very much. As First Nations across Canada, we use the buffalo all over North America. Most parts where buffaloes used to roam. We want our young people to get education and know more about their history, their ancestors, who they come from, who they are, their roots. It's an honor for me to sit here with my friends and present this to the students. They're going to be learning about their culture. Thank you.
Nish, thanks, Virgil, for your words. And Virgil does a great job of explaining that even so the buffalo has disappeared from the immediate landscape, it still has such deep resonance with the Stoney Nakoda. This is a perspective, as I was mentioning before, of Leroy Little Bear with the Blackfoot Nation. And again, I can't underestimate or understate the relevance of many nations identifying with the single creature.
What buffalo means to me is a whole lifestyle, a whole culture that revolves around that animal. That animal provides not only physical sustenance, in other words, food, clothing, and so on, but it's also a large part of the culture of our people. My goal is the same as the elders. I'd like to see free roaming buffalo out there again. Why? Because the buffalo is a very good environmentalist. Hey, it brings back birds, it brings back plants, it brings back culture, and so on.
Thanks, Leroy. So as Leroy was mentioning, the buffalo, I love how he says that, is a great environmentalist. Absolutely, the buffalo is a great environmentalist. In the top right-hand corner, you can see Elk Island National Park. And I'm missing my fancy arrow on this slide, but in 2017, there were 16 bison that were first translocated by transport truck all the way down to the Yaha-Tinder Ranch, which you can see is a darker shade of green there within the Banff National Park boundary. And from kind of as far as the trucks could drive, were then airlifted in retrofitted crates by helicopter 30-ish K into the backcountry to Yaha-Tinder Ranch, which is that teeny tiny little orange square there. So the initial phase 1 of this project in 2017 of 10 bulls and 6 pregnant cows lasted about 2 years. And then after that, they had a soft release, which is a gradual expansion into a larger habitat. And essentially the concept is quite simple, that the bison get used to their habitat the more time that they spend in it. So to not shock the bison coming from Elk Island National Park to a massive expanse is to first have 2 years or 2 seasons rather underneath them. At that point, they can go and have a greater chance of success in being able to adapt to a new territory. Oh, there's my arrow. Haha. They didn't fly that whole way. Some parts of it were driven. So as I mentioned, 10 pregnant females in 2017 and 6 males. It's actually the other way around. It's 10 males and 6 pregnant females. Sorry about that typo. And as of October 2020, which is now 5 years after the initial 2017 reintroduction, we're at a herd of around 80 bison. And the learning has been great and vast. The 1,200 square kilometer expanse that the bison now roam in is considered one of only 5 in the world. There's Henry Mountains in Utah, there's the Pink Mountains in northeastern BC, Banff National Park, which is what I'm referring to here, that the bison are being restored into, Prince Albert in Saskatchewan, and then Cold Lake in northeastern Alberta. So needless to say, this is a really big deal. And 5 years after the first reintroduction and translocation from Elk Island National Park to Banff National Park, Parks Canada is now saying, how did we do? And they want to hear from us. Just before I invite your voice to add to what I'm saying, I just want to make mention of a recent book talk that I had the privilege of going to. This is called The Ecological Buffalo by Wes Olson and Johann Janelle, and I can't recommend it enough. Leroy Littlebear says it really well. He's the one that we watched earlier. He said this book should be on everybody's reading list. And the bison really are a keystone species. This goes through the really intricate connection and relationships of the bison's dung, for example, to a dung beetle, to ant colonies that reestablish themselves to then invite a woodpecker. That specific woodpecker builds the exact right size of cavity for a northern flying squirrel to then make a nest in, one for defecating in, one for sleeping in. And it just invites this entire web of new relationships into an ecosystem. So that's just from one dung patty. And if you can imagine how many dung patties 80 bison now have on the landscape, it's just fantastic to know of all of the new relationships that are coming in. We talk about the hair from the bison, for example, being caught on bushes and shrubs. And those are being immediately used and woven in for the increased survival rate of birds in the area, as well as ground squirrels being able to insulate their nest. I could go on. There's stuff that we can look into with grassland remediation. And when we talk about carbon sequestration over a long period, over more than 5, 10, 15 years, grasslands have the capability again of being such a carbon restoration place. So that's my invitation to you. That was a lot of blabbing. This link here, I can also send to Maya so that she can circulate in her great follow-up emails, is an invitation to each of you to read the Bison Reintroduction Report from the Banff National Park. And the second link is the cultural report. So that was done a few years back now, but is the Indigenous perspective on the bison reintroduction and kind of ties in the cultural significance. Comments, good or bad, letters. This is an invitation again. I don't want to sway you one way or another, but I invite you to share your thoughts. Opinion at pc.gc.ca by December 14th. And yeah, if you have any questions, maybe pass them on my way. I'll include my my email as well with Maya.
Thank you, Heidi, for sharing your expert knowledge with us all today. We hope that the knowledge Heidi shared with us today will make you feel compelled to learn more or even start an action project around topics and issues concerning the environment. Now, if anyone has any questions for myself, Isabel, Sierra, Maya, or Heidi, now is the perfect time to ask them. You can share your questions in the chat, or you can even unmute yourself. Students and teachers, you are very welcome to ask us more about fern and conservation.
I have a question.
Yeah, go for it.
This is a question for the three with Leah, Sierra, and Maya. When you were in Canberra this weekend, maybe you can tell us a little bit about what you were working on volunteering this past weekend.
Yeah, definitely. So the purpose of that weekend we spent in Canberra was to plan our in-person summit that I briefly touched on earlier. And then we were volunteering with Parks Canada to do a trail report. So we checked Tunnel Mountain Trail for any wildlife tracks that we saw on the trail any garbage that needed picking up, if there was trees falling over, or if like there was restoration areas that people weren't staying off of, or if they were going off trail at all. So we just observed our surroundings as we hiked up and down Tunnel Mountain, which is the trailheads. It starts like right in the town of Banff. Yeah, and then we'll write a report on that and send it into Parks Canada to take a look at. We've done one other trail report last year on Johnston Canyon, and then another volunteering opportunity that we did in November of 2021 was we checked the wildlife fence along Trans-Canada Highway. So those are all examples of the volunteer events that we do as a network that you can all be involved in, which we'll get into as well.
Okay, cool.
Thanks, Heidi. Do any other students have any questions?
I actually have a question for Heidi. I'm just curious if there were any other animals other than bison that were really culturally significant to the First Nations, just out of curiosity.
Good question. I am of Swiss and Canadian lineage, so I can't answer that and speak, from more than a third party or outer perspective. But when we think of North America, we often refer to, Buffalo nations and salmon people that we have, a keystone species of similar cultural and ecological significance would, the first thing that would come to mind would be salmon. Yeah, for the western side of the Rockies and coastal peoples. But again, that's my best answer from where I sit. Yeah, thanks, Amy.
All right, I think we're good to move on.
All right, awesome. So before I let everyone go, I just want to talk to you very quickly about how you all can get involved with the Canadian Rockies Youth Network. If you scan the QR code that just popped up on screen, it's going to take you to our current participant sign-up form. And if you fill out this form, we're going to email you with a whole bunch of resources, and you're going to get invitations to attend events that we're putting on all throughout the year, which can include the in-person summit that Maya briefly mentioned. Meetings and events that you attend, they count towards volunteer hours, and those look super awesome on scholarship applications or resumes. And in addition, you get to be part of a super cool community of like-minded youth, and you get to discuss issues that you might have an opinion on that could change the way that things work in Canada. So definitely consider getting involved and sign that QR code to sign up.
If you have any questions on what those events are like, please shoot us an email or a direct message on Instagram, and we can provide more information that way. It's right on the screen. I'd recommend following us on Instagram to learn more about us. We also have a website for you to check out and get the whole story on the Canadian Rockies Youth Network. With that, I'll pass it on to Leah to close up the workshop.
Thank you all for joining us and taking the time to learn with us today. We hope you learned some new information about conservation, and we hope to see you at our next workshop on January 10th, where we will learn about political literacy and how youth can create real environmental change. See you then.
Yeah, thank you everyone so much for joining. We hope to see you on January 10th, and feel free to send us an email or DM us on Instagram. I'll likely be the one answering those, so feel free to ask me any questions or Heidi any questions as well. I'll include all of the amazing information she talked about with the Bison in our follow-up email. And yeah, I look forward to getting to know some of you a bit better